Welcome to the worst of the best podcast. You wanted the best. Well, they didn't freaking make it. So here's what you get. From Canada, Ryan and
Jason. Welcome to another episode of the Worst of the Best podcast. I'm your host, and with me today, of course, is Jason. Jason, how you doing today?
Good, my brother. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, so Jason, it's great to record with you again. I hope everyone enjoyed the last episode where I had Kaylee on. She's from the podcast Once Over with Kaylee on YouTube. She covers movies and stuff. I hope people enjoyed her Kiss coverage of the album Love Gun. Jason, are you familiar? Are you at all familiar with that album Love Gun or the song Love Gun?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not a huge Kiss person. But we all have heard it in, growing up, and we all are familiar with Kiss and with their music.
I've done Destroyer on this channel. Check it out with Craig. Go look at the feed. And that was the first time I've ever listened to a whole Kiss album, like front to cover. And quite a few times, so I had to prepare for the show. So like homework, I listened to every song, gave it objective listening, and I quite enjoyed the album. And I was actually impressed that this was a pretty good album, and it's said as much by the Kiss fans. This album too, Jay, if you haven't heard the episode yet, or if you want to go back, I don't want to spoil anything, but I was like, this is kind of fun. This is actually a fun album. It made me realize I get why Kiss has their fans, because in their early days, they certainly were a decent, fun, solid rock and roll band. It's just their look does not match their sound, which is maybe the draw. I don't know. When you listen to the album, and if you didn't know what they looked like, you wouldn't think this is what they look like. It's an odd juxtaposition.
Most people don't walk around with face paint and spacesuits. So regardless of the music, you would not anticipate that look.
So it was a lot of fun. Thanks, Kaylee, for hanging out with me, and that was a fun show to cover. Jason, this topic today is going to be interesting, I think. You and I, obviously, we were both raised religious. We have since left our religion of our youth into our adulthood. We've gone our separate ways from our religion of our upbringing, forged our own path. You and I both have a healthy respect for people that enjoy religion or find it a part of their life. Like, I have no hard feelings towards people who worship. That's not my issue. I don't have that issue with people that find peace, harmony with religion, of course, because it helps them with whatever they need. So I have no issues with that, no qualms with that.
I do have a tendency towards a spirituality, a wonderment about life, a curiosity, just the idea of organized religion having the answers and the way in which my life is to be organized and run. It stopped making sense to me to hand over my autonomy to a particular group of people who would profess to have the absolute truth as to how I should operate in my life. And that was not an easy process to go through, and as you as well. I mean, there was a lot of kind of deprogramming in which the way that we looked at the world or ourselves. And, as an adult, I'm relearning that. In that process, I'm not anti-spirituality. I'm not that there is or is not a God. I'm learning for myself how to view that on my own.
No, well said. I'm the same way. And I just have found, especially when I left my religion of my growing up years, I realized I just don't know anything, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with learning and being kind of wondered by it all. And I find life fascinating. I find it scary, and I find it wonderful, challenging, difficult. It's all those things that it should be. But I left behind, the guilt and shame and worry that religion can sometimes put on people. Like, life is hard enough as it is. I don't need the shame on top of it. That's a very, for me personally, that was one of the hardest things to live with, was just the feeling of shame and guilt. Every time I made a mistake, I felt shame and guilt, just beside just making a normal human error.
Right. You're always constantly falling short, failing or falling short. What I came to the conclusion is a structure that was created by man as they interpreted the world in which they lived in. And it put that kind of pattern on my life that I was supposed to follow. This is a huge conversation.
Oh, it is. We can't
for ourselves. So it's hard to do a deep dive of 40 plus years of
Well, people have whole podcasts on this issue, like
hundreds of episodes on this whole thing. So to be able to try and, the point being is
gives a background to our listeners a little bit to how we're approaching the subject, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
Because not everyone, we don't talk too much about our upbringing really on the show. We try to keep it, evergreen, and we don't share too much about our lives. That's not really the sense of this show. We of course would talk about it regarding artists that we like growing up and stuff, but a part of our personal lives or marriages or kids, we don't really talk about that. So this gives a little bit of background, because I know when I was raised in my religion, I used to almost scoff at science. I remember there was times that science would say something, and I'd be, wow, they're just trying to figure out how God did it. I remember when I was in, I think it was grade 10 or 12 or whatever, high school, junior high school, they're talking about evolution. Like, I remember being so pompous about it. As I'm writing the answers to the questions on my test, I was saying to myself, I know the answers to this, but I'm going to give what the teacher wants to hear. And there was that kind of almost like a pompous, this is what the teacher wants to hear. This is their answer. It's not my answer. But what's happened is that sometimes even those who aren't religious and those who are students or subscribe to the world of science, they, Jason, end up treating science like a religion. So science and science followers, some of their behaviors can mirror those who are religious. And I think we're going to talk about some of those things today, Jake. Please.
Yeah. So there's a kind of a tribalism as well, which I'm sure that's kind of like we're in different camps. I'm vegetarian. I'm a carnivore. And it becomes tribal rather than just information or different approaches to life. You're talking about this pompous idea. And actually one of the things that I was freed of, having deconstructed my religious past, one of the big freeing moments and a relief was the letting go of thinking I know exactly how life is supposed to look or feel, or the way that they don't know, I know. I'm so sure of myself. You can become extra critical or judgmental of others in that process. And you always speak for myself. I felt like I was overly critical or judgmental unnecessarily and unknowingly, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't know that wasn't a requirement of life, so it was freeing to not feel so overly confident in the way in which the world is operating. There is more mystery and more, I'm more open, less opinionated, having scaled back religious upbringing or, the indoctrination of the way that I viewed the world. In some ways, I probably have more faith now than I did when I was so sure of my religious upbringing. Does that make sense? I've never thought of it that way. More faith or hope in a positive outcome of existence rather than a surety. I was so sure of myself, and I'm glad that I kind of shed that. I feel more free.
Yeah, I feel more free too, and that's it. We of course our lives have mirrored each other a little bit too. So Jay, let's dive into it.
Yeah. So I guess that's the context in which we are viewing this topic.
So let's dive into, Jason, a comparison that might ruffle a few feathers on both sides of the aisle. How science, often revered as the epitome of reason, shares surprising similarities with religion. So this isn't an attempt to diminish science or faith, but rather Jason and I are going to explore the parallels that might make you see things just a little bit differently. I really like this topic because I think this is where I am. I admit I'm a bit contrarian. I get what religion does for people, and I get what science does for mankind, but I think there's a middle ground. I think what we're going to talk about today will show a little bit how science gets caught up a little bit the same way religion does.
I like how you said that middle ground. I feel like I'm more of a middle ground individual than where I was before. I feel not so rigid in which I view people, myself, and the world. Like, I'm more kind of just open to possibilities. I'm more relaxed in the way in which I live my life.
So, Jay, number 10, we often associate religion with the idea that humans are the centerpiece of the universe, but science also leans in this direction. So there's something called the anthropic principle. This suggests that the universe is fine-tuned for human life. So that principle reflects that idea that life basically exists, Jason, in the science world for humans to live in it. So essentially, the anthropic principle argues that the universe must be compatible with conscious beings like us because we're here to observe it. In other words, the conditions of the universe are just right for human life, and that's why we exist, to notice them. Yet, much like religion, science often places humans on a pedestal. So it's interesting that even science has a principle called the anthropic principle, that humans, even within the science world, we're on this same kind of pedestal of, we're the ones. Cats aren't doing science experiments, right? Monkeys aren't building rocket ships to put humans in space. We are. We're the ones who are going to space. We're the ones who are building X-ray machines and airplanes to fly and buildings to live in. It's humans. And we use science to build bridges. Like that actually is a science to build a bridge properly so it doesn't collapse. Right. So it's humans operated. So we are that pedestal because it's only humans, Jason, that use science. Of course, the religious part of it is that humans exist because an all-powerful being put them in existence so they can enjoy using science and discovering life. So this is what's tricky.
Well, yeah, I mean, God created the world so that we can have a place to have experiences.
Right.
The whole reason the world was created had nothing to do with anything else other than to put people on it.
Mm-hmm.
So us observing the whole universe and the billions and trillions of stars and all of those things was for us to use our science to observe those things in which we hadn't been able to observe before. The Weber telescope, the telescope that's going through space. And those stars have been there for 1 trillion years or whatever the timeline is.
Right.
Just so that we, at some point in time, could observe them with a telescope that we created with science. Yeah.
That's fascinating. All right. We're starting off with a bang. Oops, I don't want to tease one. So, Jay, you got the next one.
Both religion and science have a history of shunning dissenters. In science, questioning established ideas can lead to ostracism. Just ask anyone who tried to introduce a prayer at a scientific conference. You might find yourself labeled as a heretic, much like Kurt Gödel, who faced backlash for a logical proof of God's existence. Gödel was a brilliant logician and mathematician, best known for his incompleteness theorems, which shook the foundations of mathematics. These theorems essentially show that in any consistent mathematical system, there are statements that are true but cannot be proven within the system. In other words, no system can explain everything about itself.
I love that thought. It's so interesting. These are just brilliant people to begin with. The idea that they can't even come up with these concepts, let alone prove them with math. But the idea, Jason, that no system can explain everything about its own self. Like, nothing is explainable to the whole degree that it exists, why it is.
Right. Despite his groundbreaking work, his attempts to use formal logic to argue for God's existence were met with skepticism and isolation by his peers.
So the flip side is, the same idea when somebody tries to use, science and religion, they can be scoffed at by religious people. Well, the science community, they do it to people that
all the time. There's competing theories. They compete, and they want to be the one that I'm the one that observed the actual truth to this concept. And then somebody comes back with a competing theory. It could be more correct than the original theory, or added on or added to, but that person is pushed back because it's a new idea. The original person doesn't want to be proven wrong.
It's not brought up in our list, but I suspect there's confirmation bias probably in the science world too.
Oh, sure. That's the word. Yeah, exactly. Of course there is.
But that's not one of our things today. Okay. But that would probably be number 11, quite frankly. Okay. Jason, science has its own pantheon of saints, figures like Galileo, who is often celebrated as a martyr for standing up to the church. He is famous for supporting the idea that the earth, of course, revolves around the sun, which went against religious teachings at the time. Although he was forced to recant his views and spent the last years of his life under house arrest, he is remembered as a hero in the struggle between science and religion. Galileo eventually went blind, likely due to a combination of cataracts and glaucoma, which worsened during his years of isolation. He died in 1642, blind and still under house arrest, but his legacy lives on. So they have their martyrs, Jace. They have their Joan of Arcs, their Jesus figures, people who have died for the cause. Even in science, they have their saints.
Right.
All right, Jay, you got the next one.
So every culture has its creation myths, and science is no exception. While ancient civilizations spun tales around campfires, modern science offers the Big Bang. In simple terms, the Big Bang Theory suggests the universe began as a tiny, incredibly dense point that suddenly expanded, creating all the space, time, and matter we see today. It's a story grounded in physics, but like ancient myths, it requires us to accept something we can't fully see or touch.
This is fascinating, even within the science world, because this is scientists trying to figure out how it all started by taking God out. And I get it. This is where religious people can say, aha, your guys are you're trying to figure out the math behind creation. And we're telling you God created, like it tells you the first sentence in the Bible. And scientists are like, nonsense, boo-ha. And I get what the scientists are saying. They're like, yeah, but there's got to be this. We know how flowers bloom. We got to figure out how did the universe get created. And Jason, they basically, this requires, like it says, something that we can't fully like see or touch. They're basically saying, Jay, there was nothing. It's something. The nothing somehow. Tell me I'm wrong. Isn't that what it was? It was nothing. Incredibly dense point that suddenly expanded, creating us, a podcast, two guys talking on a microphone. Like all this came from something that's the size of a pinpoint.
Where did that pinpoint come from?
And there's theories about what was before that. Well, how can energy be before non-energy? Like I've said this before, maybe even on this show. The fact that we exist doesn't make sense. The fact that existence exists. Why the need to even be? There should just be nothing. Why the need for anything just to be? The universe, whatever that is, should just be nothing. It should be a black void of just nothing. Nothing should be nothing. There shouldn't even be the word nothing. It's just weird that there's anything.
You're right. And how something from nothing can be, and then that something from nothing is all of which we can observe. And even if some people, the idea, we're in a simulation. Who's creating the simulation? Yeah, and where did they start the ability to create the simulation?
I know. Who's God's God? I don't know, man. It makes
more sense that nothing exists rather than
that's what I mean.
All of this. Yeah.
Try to explain how we came to be is harder just to explain that why nothing should be.
I got nothing. I mean, even if a religion tells me that God created it, that doesn't really fill in any gaps for me because who created God? Oh, the other God.
Right.
Oh, who created that God? Oh, the God before. Like it's just forever and ever and ever. Well, where did the forever begin?
I don't know. Like who gave God his powers or their power? Like who gave God the power? And what is that power? Why is that power given to a person? How is that held by an individual or a thing? Yeah, I don't know. What created the power? Like this is just yeah. Okay. I just love how all the smartest people in the world, like they all kind of gathered around a table and like, okay, guys, like, look, we got to come up with something.
Even a religion doesn't actually adequately answer the question.
No, it doesn't. It just says God created the world. And what I'm saying is then, yeah, that's what scientists will say to them. It's like, well, give me a proof of God. Give me the proof. But that's exactly what the science or non-science people are saying to the Big Bang people are like, well, you're telling me that nothing created everything? Well, that's just as much evidence of us. We both have the same amount of evidence, which is nothing.
Yeah,
they have some math formulas and they have some, but you get what? Like, come on.
And then you can't just go, God created everything, and you just wash your hands of that and go like, I got you. It's not a very satisfactory answer to me either.
What's scary to me is how come another Big Bang doesn't happen within the Big Bang? Are there what do you call these? What do they call it again? A single point of a single dense point that exists within our own universe that could spontaneously explode too. You know what I mean? Like what created that thing? To me, it sounds like it could happen again within the universe because now we have all the stuff flying around. It almost should happen again.
It's so big. The whole universe or galaxies are so big. It could be happening multiple times. We just can't observe it.
It's creating the multiverse, Jay.
Oh, I think we're already in multiverses.
I don't know. Yeah, check out all other episodes, folks. We've done simulation. I don't know. Did we do the multiverse episode? I can't remember. Okay. Jay, science has developed its own set of ethical guidelines, which can sometimes clash with personal morality. One common ethical dilemma is the use of placebos in drug trials. In these trials, some patients, Jason, are given fake treatments, placebos, instead of real medicine, even though it might delay their recovery or worsen their condition. The dilemma here is whether advancing scientific knowledge justifies putting some patients at risk for the sake of the experiment. So what they're saying here is there's a bit of ethical dilemma. So, sometimes scientists will accuse religious people of being, you don't believe in this right or that, whether it's abortion rights or whatever it is. Like scientists can sometimes seem, or the science world, I should say, can sometimes seem cold or calculating compared to the religious world. This is where that could maybe be evidence for that, is because you're giving people placebos where it's like, hey, I'm using this as an example, like somebody could have early onset cancer, let's say, or dementia, and they give them a placebo and their memory comes back, they say, like, but they're like, no, this person really needs medicine. Can you just give them the medicine and don't do any kind of like fake tricks with them? Like this is someone's health retard, because you can't tell somebody they're not getting real medicine, but they don't tell them. That's the whole point. Yeah, that's just a little example there of even within the science world, they have their own personal morality issues.
Yeah, and they have their codes of ethics, obviously. I think doctors, what's their first code? Do no harm. Yeah, like do no harm, right? Yet it feels like, of what we have just experienced, we all know what I'm talking about. There seems like there could have been some long-lasting harms done in the last few years based around the ethics, air quote, ethics, that's imposed on us by science. And then some of us would have blindly follow all those things because, trust the science. There's an ethics thing. Yeah. Do we take away people's rights to do X, Y, and Z?
Well, that actually is a great example, because this is the problem. Because there used to be a time when the world was run by religion. Yeah, the church ruled the state. We get it. And I'm glad that that's not the case anymore, that we do have the separation of church and state. I don't need to eradicate the churches, but I'm glad there's a separation. But what I'm getting at is you're forcing people to do something they might not want to do. So it's almost like you're now saying that science run by man is the authority, which is odd, because religion, quote unquote, used to be the authority. But you get what I'm saying? So in some ways, we've kind of given power to science, which is still fallible. It's still always being challenged and learning, but there's been certain times in our existence, yes, Jason, where we've had to bow to science and obey, or were punished the same way people used to bow to the church, or if they didn't bend the knee, they would be punished. So that's very similar to I agree.
So, and even within science, there's competing religions, and within science, there's competing ideas. There's people who were against many of the strict mandates, against,
and they were shunned.
Approach. For example, do masks work? Don't they work? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not debating whether they do or don't. That's not my point. My point is there'd be competing ideas within the science world, and we talked about this earlier. The dissension. People were silenced, censored, shadow banned, taken off certain platforms, so their voices of, just questioning the air quote science. Then they were ostracized, or their employment taken away because they just wondered. That happens within churches. Oh, I question the narrative in which I was taught. Oh, you're dissenting, and so you're to be shunned and not listened to, and friends and family will ostracize you and say that you're a heretic and that you're a cautionary tale as to what happens when you walk away from the truth. That happens within the science community for sure.
The irony is that within, again, we'll just use COVID, that there were scientists, like I said, people within their community that said, hey, masks aren't effective. The vaccination isn't quite what we think it is. It's not doing what we advertise to the public. Like, we kind of gave them a false sense of security behind. There are limitations or boundaries that the vaccination isn't doing, that you think you're pushing this on. The narrative you're pushing isn't quite accurate. So there were scientists who were brave enough at the very beginning to say, slow your roll, fellow science community. And the irony is, Jason, they were the Galileos of their time, because it turns out 4 years later, those dissenters at the beginning have turned out to be true. It's interesting that these early people at the beginning, they were the Galileos within the science community. So the irony is that the science community holds Galileo as some sort of saint. There are Galileos within the science community who have 4 years later have turned out like they were right about masks being ineffective. They were right about the vaccinations not quite doing what was advertised. Look, it was a tricky time. I get it.
Well, that's an example. Like it's a recent example. It's all fresh in our minds.
It is recent.
It does correlate well with what you're saying about Galileo, and I'm sure a whole host of other people who suggest there are cures to cancer. The whole medical is science, right?
Right.
Most of us would consider it a science. The science, the medical field, the pharmaceutical companies, the poisonous food industry, the toxic environments in which we live in, they all feed off of each other. And then people who say we can break the cycle of these industries that are feeding off each other, making money off of each other, But for some reason, those people who go, hey, maybe a small, cheap alternative to the pharmaceutical wheel could be a better option for people. But they are shunned because science or the medical industry or the pharmaceutical industry is just so big and powerful. It silences the voices of others who just question or given a different approach.
All right. Jay, you got the next one.
Okay. Science has its own hierarchy, with figures like Newton, Darwin, and Einstein occupying the highest echelons. But beneath them are the experts and well-known scientists whose words are treated as gospel. Challenging these figures can be as risky as questioning religious leaders, and even other scientists must tread carefully when doing so.
I've heard about that with like Einstein. I know there's been Einstein, of course, he was a genius, but there's people who have, I think some people have proven some of his stuff wrong.
Yes.
I'm not a science nerd, so I don't know, I know more about religion type thing than I do about science. So I admit my history of science and this issue here about this hierarchy issue. I seem to recall my journeys through audiobooks and stuff that some of Einstein's stuff has been picked apart a little bit and challenged.
But that's theories.
But we need to do that. We need to.
Yeah, that's the whole idea of science.
So what happened in our faith is that we looked at our leaders. Let's say, I'm not saying which religion, but we would look at our leaders and kind of like, I don't know if that's right. I'm looking at my eyes today. I'm like, I understand that was something then, but I'm looking at my eyes now, and I'm like, that doesn't sit with Ryan today. And I'm challenging that thinking or that way of being. I don't think that's working for me. And I'm going to use an experiment on myself and try something different because that's not working. And so if you look at this scientifically, it's the same with these people. That they take Einstein's whatever. They take, they can take a base of it and say, you know what? Okay, I've got something here, but it's not taking me where I want to go. I need to go further. That's all. Thanks, Einstein, for the heads up. I want to go further. And that's what the church did for me. Was it took me as far as it could go. And that's fine. But then I had to break free a little bit. It's like I need to go a little bit further because I'm feeling chained in. I can't question anything. I can't think anything different. I have to be in line. It's just, I'm telling you. Can you imagine if you put the same restrictions on scientists that you did on religious people? Meaning that even though we're talking about in the science world, they do still face this kind of like heresy when people do kind of question these early experts, but what I'm getting at is at least science says, well, hey, look, we have to re-examine our information. We have to test it. That's the whole point of science. Like that is what science is supposed to be. It's supposed to be tested and challenged and looked into. Mm-hmm. But when religion says don't do that to us, you got to kind of wonder why.
Yeah, when you're told don't read particular books, don't watch a particular movie, don't introduce ideas that may be opposing to the historical accuracies of which you've been taught. When you're starting to be told that you cannot on your own investigate other angles to a narrative, well, I start to wonder, well, how strong is your narrative?
Here, I'll tell you this much. I'll end it with this part here is imagine, just think of your kids, Jay. Okay. Pretend the kids are your congregation and you're the leader of your church. You should be able to say to your kids, I've given you a way to live your life, whatever it is, but by all means, go find out for yourself. Look into every book, everything, talk to everyone. Could you imagine telling your kids, hey, don't go to that university, don't go to that city? But why does religion do that? I would never tell my own kids to never not look. I would say, by all means, look, investigate, question, challenge, and anything that cannot be questioned or challenged, that's the very thing you should question. Like,
yes, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
It's just like the organizations.
What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?
Exactly. Like if you're watertight,
you're good to go.
What's the concern?
Science should at least, it's supposed to allow that same intrusion. You got to dig in deep. I want to know how you came up with that answer. I want to know what equipment you used. I want to know what you were looking at because I want to do the same experience because I trust you, but I want to verify. What you're telling me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We're talking about the hierarchy here, right? Like, there's kind of levels to the science. If you don't follow the narrative in which certain people have been propped up, then, you're dissenting. Think of a Tesla and all his experiments. And then he's basically wiped off the face of the scientific map. Apparently, when he died, they took all his patents. What was science scared that might be found within his information? They were protecting their own interests by wiping away him. That happens within a religious experience. They try to silence people who aren't following the narrative to protect their own interests.
All right, awesome discussion. So science, Jason, is not immune to dogma. We've kind of touched on this already. For centuries, doctors believing in bloodletting, the practice of draining the patient's blood to cure illnesses. They thought it balanced the body's fluids, but in reality, it often made patients worse. Despite clear evidence against it, the practice continued because it was a deeply ingrained belief. So much like religious doctrines that persist despite contradictory evidence. So, of course, we could spend another whole 2 hours giving examples of religious doctrines that aren't true despite contradictory evidence. People just hold on to that confirmation bias. No, I don't care what the world's saying around me. I know this is true. But science has been guilty of it. Bloodletting, done for years.
Right. What's interesting is it often, as far as the science goes, that's more of a medical science. It seems to be often I've heard people that are like, the medical field is like 20, 30. Like by the time your family doctor churns the Titanic of new information and is now teaching it to their patients, it takes 20, 30 years for new information. There was always this idea that saturated fats is horrible for your body and it causes so many problems. Yet it's pretty proven now that that's not the problem. It's more of a metabolic disease problem, sugar, etc., that causes the problems that many of us are facing in our health. But you still get this, within the lexicon of conversations. Yeah, it takes a long time for these new ideas and the dogmas of the past to change and slowly change in people's lives and et cetera, et cetera. There's just dogmas all around. Often they say it takes say there's a false advertisement or a false headline, and then they make the one correct, that spreads around the world, right. And they make the correction. Right. For some reason, the correction on the headline or the nutritional label or the science, nobody really hears the correction. They just have this. They still believe in what they were told in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You got the next one, Jay.
Science is often thought to be objective, but it is not free from the influence of societal trends. Take, for example, the changing views of homosexuality within the field of psychology. The DSM once classified it as a disorder, a stance that shifted with public opinion, revealing that science, like religion, is sometimes swayed by the times.
So it doesn't even matter what side of the fence you're on. Maybe it is a disorder. I'm just being not silly, but being serious here. Maybe let's just pretend it was a disorder, right? But the public doesn't think so. So science is like, yeah, you're right. So I'm just saying, like, that's what religion has done too. Religion has been like, you get what I'm saying? So religion is the same way. They will say it's a sin. The homosexuality is a sin, and you can choose not to be gay. But now religion has come around and said, a lot of religions, well, okay, you were born that way. It wasn't a choice to be gay, but it's still your cross to bear, and you don't act on it. So it's funny how you still have homosexuality is just a thing. It's like, this is the thing that quote unquote exists. Like, it exists, and you're gay or you're not. I'm not, you're not. I didn't choose to be straight. So that's always my argument is I never chose to be straight. So I don't know what that means when you're not. Like, that's not my business. I just know that I didn't choose to be straight. I just am straight. That being said, that's probably maybe why psychology or these early doctors, if people are born straight and if you're born gay, that must be a disorder of some sort. And then religious people were like, no, you chose to be gay because God never makes mistakes. So yeah, homosexuality is a great example where both sides of the fence.
Well, and we can see the softening on many religions in which they approach homosexuality. Many religions, not all, have softened their stance or their approach or the way in which homosexuals are talked about. Right. And I think you've seen that within the religion in which we came from. They don't fully accept it, but they are much more inclusive to these marginalized groups or
well, they're bleeding members, right? A lot of the major religions of the world are bleeding members, and so I hate to say it, I have a theory that some of this softening has to do with trying to retain membership and try to soften. We're a pretty good club. Hey, come on.
We're a big tent.
Yeah, we're a big tent. Exactly. We're a big tent. Everyone's invited. Yeah. the religion I grew up in is not the same one today as it was 30 years ago. And I'm not saying it's good or worse. I'm just saying it just shows you that it's changing, that none of it's the same. Yeah, anyways. If it's not the same, then why does it matter? Why does it matter if I don't go? It's not the same church. It's not the same church. Anyway.
That just proves to me it's a man-made organization.
If people of our faith that we grew up in, Jay, went back in time to when it was formed, they wouldn't recognize their own church.
Right.
They would not even recognize, other than some of the key names or figures, they wouldn't believe the ears. Don't even get me started on the racism that they'd be hearing.
I was saying the same thing.
They would even
right. All of a sudden, that changes in 1978.
God softened his feelings on black people.
It's human, and as things and opinions and are broadened, it changes.
All right, here's my last one, Jay. Many scientific theories remain unproven, yet are widely accepted. So again, you could argue how the world was created in religion is a religious theory that's widely accepted with a lot of religious people, right? God created the earth. If I went to a Christian faith and said, hey guys, God created the earth, they'd be like, yeah, duh. Next, that would be the response. The same thing is actually happening within the scientific community. There are scientific theories that they spout off, the scientists, that people just accept. For example, dark matter. Scientists believe it makes up most of the universe's mass, but we can't see or measure it directly. Yet they preach it. Dark energy, thought to be the force behind the universe's expansion. Yet it's invisible and undetectable. That's insane. It's invisible and undetectable, Jason, yet it is something that they say exists. I understand people much smarter than me, but again, these are unproven. Quantum strings. These are hypothetical tiny strings that could explain all particles and forces, but there's no direct evidence they exist. And lastly, ego in psychology, the concept that there's a part of our mind managing our sense of self, but no one can pinpoint where it's located in the brain. So these ideas are accepted largely on faith that future discoveries, they hope, will confirm them.
See, and this is where dogma becomes dangerous, is that these unproven ideas, yet they are held strongly, and they get perpetuated over and over and over again over a long period of time. And it's hard to break these ideas that have very little evidence, but they're just perpetuated as if it's a reality. And it's hard to prove against something when there's no evidence either, for or against.
Well, the old saying is, Jay, there's a floating teapot growing around the earth. And I'm telling you it's there, and you're like, well, show me. And I'll say, show me it's not there. Like, you got to prove to me that it isn't.
Exactly. Yeah. And the reality is we know less than what we know. Or what's the wording? Sorry.
We know less than can be known or is known or like should be known or could be known. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's too much.
We don't know everything.
Yeah, we don't know. I don't know anything.
We know, yeah.
All right, Jay, you got the last one.
So really, this is the unifying belief that both science and religion have in common, and that is there is faith. While science demands evidence, many of its theories, like the Big Bang, require belief in something unseen. Even the most rational minds must sometimes rely on intuition, making science not so different from the faith it often critiques. And it goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
People of faith talk with such certainty with very little evidence of the certainty in which they speak. So it goes both ways. So whether you follow science or religion, we're all believers in something. You can be a scientist and religious. And I suspect I am in the middle as well. Obviously there is science. There's evidence of things,
Well, the simplest one I think we mentioned before is like there was a time people believed that thunder and lightning was an angry god. Now we know it's a weather phenomenon. So that's where science has come in and said, okay, guys, relax. Or ancient people used to do rain dances, Jason, to make it rain for their crops. They desired rain for their food and vegetables. And they would do rain dance or pray for rain. But again, we found out rain comes and goes due to weather that we can now forecast. We're not forecasting God's weather patterns. We're just forecasting, hey, it's going to rain in 7 days. Like, you don't have to dance, guys. I got the app right here. Right. So that's where science, I'm cool. Like, hey, yeah, absolutely. Science has told me what thunder and lightning is, how tidal waves are made, all these natural phenomena. We thought were the gods were angry. No, it's just nature. It's got nothing to do with a god is angry at you. You live in a part of the world where there's a lot of earthquakes. You live in a part of the world where it's really deserty. You live in a part of the world where there's a lot of fish. It just depends where you live. That's got nothing to do with God created or a god or whatever type of, Zeus with his thunder. Yeah, but then on the flip side, I prayed and it made me feel better. And I got the energy and strength to go throughout my day. Did God give you that strength? Did it come from within? Neither science can prove it, nor the person who received an answer to their prayer can prove it. What that person will say to you is, Jay, is like, you know what? It helped me. And at the end of the day, it's not what this life is all about. Helping each other out, being good to another, praying gets you through the day, Jason. If you're praying to a God or whatever God, the God, whoever, more power to you. If it makes you feel better and you're better because of it, then that's fine. That's the kind of religion I can get behind. That's your faith. That's your religion. That's fine. You're not causing harm to anybody. You're not causing me to feel shame because I don't pray. That's okay. That's your life, man. Cool. It works for you. Not to rehash where we are now in our life. Let's now, Jason, pick what we think is maybe the worst offender or the worst thing that mirror or the worst example of a mirroring. I don't know, which one do you want? The worst offender or the worst example of a mirroring religion and science?
I think the worst offender, like where they both fall short of helping humanity.
Ooh. This episode's a little bit more of a sticking to the science. You know, we're sticking our finger to science a little bit here because religion gets a lot of flack from science. Like and they go both ways, but science would like to think that, like science is under the guise that they're beyond religion, meaning like, oh, you guys can have your prayers and your seances or whatever it is, but this is how water works. This is how flowers bloom. This is like, so don't come at me with your hooey stuff. I'm telling you how the world works type thing. Okay. But we've just discovered that science, despite its feeling of betterness, so to speak, than religion, how it explains the world around us, there is one thing that I think they're all kind of offenders in their own way, but I'm just going to go with the Big Bang. It's the funniest thing because of all the things that science gets right. Look, it's amazing. I'm grateful for science. I've literally have had medical saving procedures done on me and family members, right? You with your diabetes and the shot, that you are alive, Jason, because of science. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we have family members who have had surgeries recently who are alive so I'm grateful for science and that it has prolonged loved ones' lives on this planet before we all have to leave, right? But what I love though is that science, like, crap, how do we explain how this all began? I don't look at all right, a Big Bang. Yeah, Big Bang. There was nothing, and all of a sudden there was something. Yay! And then religion's like, yeah, we call that the God snap. So I just think it's funny how both the science world and the religious world have come to the same conclusion, Jay. We have no effing idea how it all began. And I feel that in a weird way, in a fun way, that is the worst offender because it's literally the beginning of everything with us. Is the fact that we exist cannot even be explained by science as well. Yet they kind of use the Big Bang as like, no, I can't hear you. It can't be a powerful being.
Right. Yeah, that's a very strong argument. But I'm going to be a little bit more personal in my viewpoint. It may be because just how I had personally experienced or exited religion. And so when I see science prop up individuals to be the end all and be all of truth, it's kind of like we idolize and we don't question. And then if you do, you're ashamed and you're ostracized. And I'm sure you can understand the correlation between the religion and science in this way.
Yeah, for sure.
So for me, it's going to be science has its own hierarchy. Certain individuals just get propped up and they cannot be questioned. And they're the end all and be all of life's answers.
And people are hurt by it.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows how much further along we could be if society would allow us to have a more open dialogue to challenge certain individuals' theories or ideas in science.
All right. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jay. This was an awesome discussion. There's a lot of topics here. There are literally podcast series almost dedicated
within
to
each
topic.
Yeah.
Within the science world and the religious world. And I'm sure those podcast feeds have arguments for and against for both as well, where they're discussing both sides of the aisle. Hopefully Jason and I did fairly okay in a short period of time and what we had to share. But remember, in front of every silver lining, there's a cloud. And today for Ryan, it was the Big Bang Theory. And for Jason, it was the hierarchy of scientists, leaders, and worshiping at their altars.